Our mission at the Th1 Institute is trading through, or transformation through a trading metaphor. So the first part is going to be somewhat things about that. So if you look at the word transformation, form means something very physical, your body, what's very solid. And trans means to go beyond, and then there's the part at the end is an action. And I'm not sure how this got in on this particular slide, but I remember one particular person very much objecting to some of the things I said, and he said, I am a limited being on a rock hurling through space, and anything you do to take me away from that, is getting me away from reality. So that's kind of the place I'd like to transform you from, and hopefully none of you are there. Trans, well, that part is on here. So there's various levels of transformation that we do. Level 1 has to do with this topic today, which is Th1. So you basically trade your beliefs. You don't trade the markets, you just trade your beliefs. And until you begin to look at your beliefs to see if they're useful or not, they kind of control your reality. And so the first level of transformation is to adopt a whole bunch of useful beliefs, which come from the modeling work I've done with good traders, and I call it Th1. None of the beliefs, or probably very few of them, are mine specifically. They're just kind of borrowed, but collectively, I think we're the only ones who say all of them. Level 2 is to realize that you are not a limited human being, but someone who shapes your experience through your beliefs, that you realize the formless part, that you can change everything by a simple thought. So I'm an NLP modeler. NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. I've modeled many, many things. Many top traders. We've done a wealth process, the system development process, position sizing. And but the net result of all this modeling is the set of beliefs that I call Th1. And these are not based, as I said, not based on my personal belief, but they're the results of our modeling work. And they allow you to think in terms of probability and statistics instead of predicting the market and trying to be right 100% of the time, which is one intention goal of this kind of thinking. So in my opinion, it's really important to internalize these before you start to trade. For the super traders, it's like one of the first things on the checklist, and I guess that's why we have 4 or 5 people here who are in the super trader program. Although they're supposed to read Trading Beyond the Matrix to get in, and that details most of these. So let's talk about some of the basics, which is a belief. So a belief could be any thought that passes through your head that you tend to attach to. And the more you attach to it, the more you become it. And everything I say in this workshop reflects my beliefs. And beliefs may or may not be true. I would say it's probably more useful to say every belief is only true within a context, and no belief is absolutely true. And as soon as you change the context, the belief might not be true. So, for example, Trading Beyond the Matrix, Chapter 6 lists 40 Th1 principles, which will make you a better trader and investor. And then there's 12 more, or 14 more in Chapter 12. So my goal is to pretty much thoroughly cover those in this workshop. So I'm not just listing them, but hopefully that you understand them. So one of the problems with trying to do this is people don't give up their beliefs very easily, because for most of you, that's your reality. So you cling very much to what you think your model of the world is, and that's what it is. Beliefs may have an emotional charge on them, which means you can't give them up. So you could have a belief like, I'm useless and not worthwhile. If you have that belief, it's pretty obvious that it's not a useful belief, but chances are it has a lot of charge on it, and that charge is basically going to make sure that you keep it until you release the charge. So you'll learn about how to do that in the workshop. Level 3 transformation. So as you begin to change massively, so let's say you transformed 1,000 beliefs, and you begin to raise your level of consciousness, and I think you can actually measure this by your level of happiness. So did everybody take a happiness test before they came in here?
Yes.
And you know what your score is?
Yes.
So it could range from minus 35, I think, to plus, or maybe it's minus 55, I'm not sure. I'll say minus 55 to plus 85. And if you're minus 55, you're probably on the level of, I couldn't imagine you'd be here because you'd be thinking about committing suicide. And plus 85, you're about to turn to light and disappear, or you're lying to yourself. Minus 35 to 85. So I expect people who finish the Super Trader 1 to be at least at 60 by the time they finish, and the goal is 75 plus. So there's a strong correlation between your level of consciousness and your level of happiness. And for those of you who couldn't take it from us and are watching on the video, you can go to that website and take the happiness test and see how you rank. And this is basically the scores. So if you score someplace between, I'm not going into the negative scores because at that point you've got some real work to do. But a minus score is very unhappy. 0 to 30 is average level happiness. 31 to 50 is generally happy. 51 to 75 is above average happiness. And 76 or higher is happy for no reason. It's kind of curious because if you go to the iTunes podcasts, or iTunes University, there's actually a course you can take on happiness. And I think I started to look at that, and the next thing I knew, I was participating in a Harvard happiness review, which I think the first one was 18 months. So they asked me 3 times a day for a month to rate my happiness. Well, I was already in the 70s by that time. And so they'd say, are you inside or outside? And how many people are you interacting with? And how do you rate your happiness? And how much sleep did you get? And all kinds of questions to see if they could rate it. At the end, I think I'd rated myself between 95 and 100 for every single measure, which probably didn't help them much in their research. And at the end, I sent an email to this guy, and I actually got an email back. So then I looked him up so I could see what his theories were. And his theories were kind of interesting, but I sent him an email, and I said, all of these things that you're theorizing produce high happiness could be correlated with higher levels of consciousness. But I guess consciousness is one level of abstraction too far for him. But you could do that if you wanted to. You can actually go to the Harvard, it's the iTunes happiness course, and the next thing you know, you might be taking that survey. And the next survey they sent me was in 6 months, and then another one in another 6 months, and then another 6 months. And they don't give up. They think I might get unhappy one day. So here's the average happiness scores in our SuperTrader program. So at admission, we have some people who are down here, and they usually go in on probation or something like that. And doesn't change too much by the time they take the first lesson. By the time they get to the 5th lesson, it's pretty high, and by the time they do the 18th lesson, we're pretty much meeting our goals. But I have some skewed ones who come in at 85 to begin with. And then here's an example. I don't know who any of these people are, but I just took a few good examples. So this person somehow rated it on a scale of 1 to 100, but they said they were pretty happy when they were born, and then it went really downhill, and then it's up and down, and then about the time they got in the SuperTrader program, it took off again. There's another example. They weren't as happy when they were born, but they got better by the time they were 7 and then went down. And this is an example of the scale of consciousness. Now, this is from 3 different sources, because David Hawkins, the Sedona method, dynamism, which was a spin-off from Scientology, all have a happiness scale that's pretty similar. So my guess is the source is similar. And 700 plus is like enlightenment, and 600 is peace. And the way I see it, and the way David Hawkins talks about it, 200 is like a cutoff. Below 200, you're negative. Above 200, you're positive. And if you look at things like fear and desire, so if your state of consciousness when you're trading is fear, you're at about 100. If you're in a state of greed, you're at maybe 125. But if you're up here at, say, 350, acceptance, in other words, you can accept your losses, and you're in a much better place and much more likely to make money. And maybe if you're up in those higher levels, you can just manifest the results you want. So, again, this is kind of what I just said. Fear is 100 on the scale. Greed is not much better, 125. And acceptance is where I'd like most people to be when they start trading. So with enough transformation, your brain changes and it becomes permanent. There are beginning to be lots of studies on brain changes and spirituality, for example. You can actually take one of the great courses on spirituality in your brain by Andrew Newberg. And he has an interesting book like How God Changes Your Brain. And the thought processes that you go through, and as you kind of make higher level thought processes permanent, it does change your brain. So that's the 4th level. You begin to realize that everything is one, and even understand what it means to be one with the markets. And you realize that you used to give meaning to everything, and then you judge it, and then you go beyond that and see the perfection of what is, and conflicts and problems would disappear. Now there's some relatively new material I'm getting, so that's going to be here, and it's not in your slides, but I kind of want to talk about it. It's been so long since I've taken basic NLP programs, and it sort of I became unconsciously competent with it, and I never really thought too much about it afterwards. And I've been reviewing a lot of things. And I really forgot that the basic presupposition of NLP is the map is not the territory. And what that really means is your map of the world isn't the world. And translate that on another level, it means your reality is all made up. and how useful it is basically how well you function. And then I've recently found a fellow his books are kind of poorly written, but he's very prolific in writing, and the ideas are great. It's L. Michael Hall, and he's a PhD psychologist. So imagine loud noise, something like, now, what happened when that loud noise, you heard that loud noise? Maybe a little startle response? So loud noise, startle response. Now already I'm kind of masking this because I'm representing it in terms of symbols. Like there's a line that goes down and a line that goes across, and then there's sort of a funny looking circle, and this sort of, I guess you'd call it U-shaped. And if you put them all together and you learn the symbols for how to pronounce them, you might come out that it's loud. And then if you have that memorized, you have some idea what loud means, and you have some internal representation of what that means. What you got here was energy waves impinging on your ears, which you interpreted as noise. And the intensity you labeled loud. And then whatever reaction you had to that was startle response. But here's where it gets interesting, because from here on, this is how you make up everything. Because our brains are what Michael Hall calls reflexive, which means you don't have a thought, you have a thought and then another thought and then another thought, and each one's thinking about the last thought. So this first thought might say, that scared me. Here, that refers maybe to this. Scared is a word you're now making up to refer to this in a way you're interpreting it. And then me is something you made up to call yourself. And yourself is something I made up to call you. Then you might go, then you start to reflect on this, and you go, I'm afraid. Now you have an identity level belief. You are afraid. So you interpret that scared me to being a general state for yourself that you now have identified with. And then, but we don't stop reflecting here. So the next statement might be, loud noise is bad. You're afraid, so you decide loud noises make you afraid. Or maybe you have another one. Let's put an intermediate. Say, I don't want to be afraid again. And then loud noise is bad. And then you can reflect on that some more and go, people who make loud noises are bad. Notice we've gone from this and whatever your reactions are to this. But it doesn't stop here. Depends on who you are and how you do this, but now we might get Van is bad. I made the a loud noise.
Or I shouldn't make loud noises because I'll be bad.
I don't have beliefs like that. This is somebody else. And then another one. Van is dangerous. And you can see how this is a self-reflective process. You're just reflecting on one set of beliefs or one set of things after another. The closest thing you came towards what happened originally was this noise. But now we got Van is dangerous, and then we might get the world is a dangerous place. There are lots of people like Van. So Van is dangerous, the world is a dangerous place, and then I'm depressed. Now, did you get the logic of this? Because I thought it was a really good illustration. We went from me making a loud noise. Actually, I interpreted it as something that stung my hands. And you had a reaction to it, and then at some point you did. And the thing is with all these is that we do them repeatedly, these various styles, and then they become habits, and then it becomes a very unconscious processing method. So two of the things Michael Hall says that's quite different from what I've seen before. He first talks about, how there's all these different meta states that go up higher and higher that basically shape who you are. And another thing he says is that, which I found really, I made it a self-reflection. I did the self-reflection based on some of the things he said and came to a conclusion that states of consciousness or levels of consciousness could be interpreted as high-level metaprograms. Like, what if you interpreted the whole world through the filters? Oh, that one doesn't want to work. Everything is perfect. Now, it's easy to get to this because if you go and look at some of the worst things that have ever happened to you, at least that you judged them as that at the time, they were such huge learning lessons, and they probably transformed you immensely, and you can look back after some time, and if you're evolving at all, and say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. So you begin to think, and if you come to this as a meta state, the world is perfect, and I'm so grateful, which could be a reflection on that. And if those two meta states rule your world, then you are at a high level of consciousness. So maybe that's another way to explain levels of consciousness. And if you do this enough, this is probably going to change your brain. So that wasn't part of the planned presentation, but since I just wrote an article on it, but you can now see, what you are is a meaning maker. So you hear things, and you give and see things, and you give meaning to them. A Course in Miracles, the first 2 lessons. Lesson 1 says, everything or nothing I see has any meaning. So you go, that doesn't have any meaning. This doesn't have any meaning. This doesn't have any meaning. That doesn't have any meaning. That's lesson 1. You do it for a couple minutes twice a day, I think. And then the second one is everything I see has the meaning I give it. So this has the meaning I give it. I'm calling it a bell. And I bought it at the Oneness Temple, so it's a special bell. And this is Little Van. He's very special. Yeah. I'm giving it meaning, and this is a very special picture to me. So, and I just illustrated how it's all there. So, bottom line is you make it all up. So, if you can accept that, let's make it up in a way that's useful within the context of trading. So level 4 occurs with enough self-work. Imagine the impact of changing 5,000 beliefs. We will probably do oneness blessings at the end of each of these days. So how many blessing givers do we have in here? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So you'll get 9 or 10, Rebecca's a blessing giver, so you get about 10 blessings, 2 days, that's 20 blessings. That's pretty impactful. Sometimes we'll have, when we do a set of peak 101, 202, and 203, we probably have, especially towards 202, we might be all super traders, and most of them are blessing givers. And so you might be getting, say, 15 blessings a day, and that means 45 at the end of a 3-day workshop. And the interesting thing about that is, I don't know what it means, but when you get the blessing, you feel very peaceful at minimum. And when you get a bunch of these, and the reason we do these blessings is it seems to really change people's consciousness. So that's an example of the oneness blessing. So what happens with that? A divine energy flows through the blessing giver into the recipient. Interesting feedback. When I first wrote that article, I sent it to one of my super traders who's currently on lesson 20, and part of lesson 20 is doing a daily dialogue with his internal guidance. So he started to ask his internal guidance about this, and his internal guidance is going, oh, really interesting. So if it's all made up, what am I? And he goes, well, you're my internal guidance. Well, but how am I into this model that you all made up? And he goes, well, you might be my contact with reality. And went on and on like that, but maybe that's the only reality. Anyway, divine energy throws through the blessing giver into the recipient. Energy causes a changes in the brain. If the left parietal, when you start to learn about this stuff and realize everything relates to how the brain processes information, well, the sense of self occurs as a function of the left parietal lobe. If that slows down, then you don't seem to be different from everything else. The prefrontal cortex activity is speeded up. You have a quieter mind and more divine guidance. And the net result is an increase in consciousness. Individual impact includes a sense of peace, a quieter mind, unconditional joy, or nothing happens and then it hits you a day later. And the overall impact is awakening. Consciousness goes, say, above 500. Your sense of self disappears, although personalities remain. And I'm getting into this a little bit later, but who you really are is a crowd inside. You're a collection of personalities. So there's every role you play in life is a different personality. It's sometimes said that every time you resist something out there is you don't like, so you resist it. You create a level of solidity inside yourself, which becomes a personality, and then you think it's real, and then it goes off doing its own thing. And then after a while, you've got hundreds of personalities that you collectively call by your name. And if you want to test this out, every time you use the word I, ask yourself who's talking. And don't assume there's a collective me. So the sense of self disappears, but there's still these personalities. The processing of issues is much more rapid. So if you haven't, if you've got a lot of stored emotions, that won't necessarily disappear, but you'll be much more likely to allow them to flow through you as they come up. Mine was different because I processed just about everything. So I cannot remember the last time I was really, really upset. The closest it came, I'm selling my NSX because I'm getting a Tesla. And so somebody came down. They'd wired the money, it was in the bank account, and they came down to look at the car. And I promised him if he didn't like the car, he could get it back. And then I watched him because he was wired in a really interesting way. He would see a hairline scratch or something on the car, and it would turn into a physical response that would affect his whole neurology. And for example, he saw, I would say, all my wheels look brand new. And he saw two that has scuffs on them. It's like, this has to be replaced. And then, and it just was one thing after another, every one of them at a level that I couldn't really even see. And it reminded me of, well, for example, if I go in the kitchen and I do something, and chances are I'll spill something. And, maybe I spill some rice or something, and then I'll quickly clean it all up so it looks clean to me. But chances are I left one piece of rice left, and then my wife will come in and say, "You keep messing up my kitchen, stay away." And as far as I was concerned, it was all gone. But so anyway, he decided after a while he didn't want the car. He wanted his money back. And I'm thinking, well, the car's been off the market now for 5 days. But okay, so my happiness maybe went down to 80. And then I went to relist it in eBay, and I made a couple changes to the listing, and as soon as I made the changes, there was a big error. It said error, and then the next thing I knew, eBay was gone, or at least I couldn't get into eBay. I was logged out and I couldn't get back in, and when I tried to log in, it would say, "There's something wrong with your password or your ID." And then when I'd send my email in, say I forgot my password, it would say, this email doesn't exist. And I'm going, all right. Yeah, eventually, I think there my happiness went down to 75 or 70. And then I'm looking at, I'm going online and looking at eBay down, and suddenly there's all kinds of things about eBay had been hacked, or hundreds of accounts had been stolen or eradicated, or who knows what. And anyway, bottom line was, I went in and I asked my internal guidance, and she said, I said, why is all this happening? She said, well, what makes you think him not buying the car has anything to do with you? Or is you're a peaceful guy and he's got lots of issues to deal with. How do you think he felt? I mean, he rented a trailer, drove 600 miles, and then drove the empty trailer back 600 miles, having to worry about whether I'd even give his money back, which was $69,000. And so it was his issue. And I go, okay. And then, well, what about the thing with eBay? And she said, somebody's been praying for that car. Maybe it's one of you, and I'm telling you this because one of you wants to buy it, but I don't know. But somebody's been praying for that car, and that person's supposed to get it. And if you'd been able to list it when you did, that wouldn't have happened. Still don't know who that person is. But. So that's how I handle that whole issue. Even though somehow I felt slightly depressed, but slightly depressed is like, here's your scale, 100, and say this is 0, and this is minus 50. And most people would consider depressions like this. For me, it was probably, I'm here. It's a different. So, this processing of issues becomes much more rapid. So it's not a big deal anymore. And the only reason I asked about it in the first place was because I couldn't remember having a problem in over almost a year and a half, and suddenly this was beginning to seem like a problem. And so happiness skyrockets, and eventually very little bothers you, and you see the perfection of what is, which I've already been talking about. And you can trade in the now, which means you really just see the markets for what they're doing and can do whatever it says to do. So growing transformations. Hawkins, when Hawkins first came out with his scale, he said the average human being was at about 196 on the scale, so slightly negative. And slightly negative, actually it was about 190, I think. And slightly negative is enough to destroy the world. But he said a couple people at 700 or above or on that scale were enough to balance everybody out. And had been that way for thousands of years. That one awake person can influence 100,000 others. That's an interesting bounce effect. And most of you know of at least a few awake people. So in the 1930s, David Hawkins became awake. In 1953, Lester Levinson became awake. In 1977, Eckhart Tolle. 1986, Byron Katie, the original oneness phenomena, was born in 88. 2012 was supposed to be a sort of a tipping point. And by August 2012, there were 70,000 awake people on the planet, according to oneness. And in June this year, more than 2 million awake people, since one awake person can influence 100,000 others, this is enough to change the planet. So, if you came here to learn about trading, I'm getting to that. So, how you're programmed. So, levels of programming. If you think about a computer has an assembly language, it runs on zeros and O's. Well, we have neurons which are on and off. So there's trillions of nerve cells that are going on and off. And then there's an operating system that kind of governs it all. And the operating system is what the brain runs on, is meanings, beliefs, and submodalities. Although I might be wrong about submodalities, I call them very basic level. And Michael Hall says they should be called metamodalities because they're very meta. They are the basis of judgment, and when they're at a much higher level than the picture or the modality themselves. So we'll get into that in a little bit. And finally, you have low-level programmings called mental strategies that you are usually unaware of. Things like your motivational strategy, your convincer strategy, your decision-making strategy, your reality strategy, which is how you decide to believe something. When you decide to believe something, you decide it's real. So, levels of programming, there's a language you speak fluently. There's personalities that operate within the language. And then there's beliefs that each of those personalities hold. So you'll find that if you ask an individual part of you what it believes, so this is like lesson 1B in the Super Trader program, you're going to, so you come up with your fearful part, and your fearful part's got 20 identity level beliefs. Then if you go to your trader part, who might have 20 identity level beliefs, but that part definitely won't believe some of the beliefs of the fear part. So the beliefs are actually in the personalities. And then you have internalized belief, which exclude or include, fanatical beliefs, which want to exclude from existence. And remember what I said about beliefs initially? The more you attach to them, the more significant they become. All this is the level of attachment that you have to these beliefs. So there's the impact of submodalities. Ooh, look at it again. So there's the normal picture. And if you change the submodalities to gray, doesn't that produce a judgment? Like, will you eat this?
Yes.
Will you eat this? Maybe it's not dusty, maybe it's just gray. I don't think there's any dust. So actually a good point. You just gave a meaning to that. You said it's dusty. The submodality caused you to give a meaning called dusty. There's no dust on that.
There's another one that came to my head, which is happy times, sad times.
Okay?
So.
Yeah, that's all meanings you gave it. And none of that's real. You just made it up. So an example of a meaning. So think of a dog. Notice what comes to your mind. Sammy, what comes to your mind when you think of a dog?
I've had dogs, so love comes to my mind because I pet my dog and play.
You think of your particular dog? Okay.
Just happy, tail wagging.
Okay.
Same boat, happiness, joy.
Nobody's thinking of a particular bow wow?
Border collie.
All right. I usually like this one because everybody's got some different kind of image. If I ask tree, I get 3 or 4 oak trees, even though they might all be the same. So even a simple word like dog has different meanings for different people. So if you think of the word a dog, what meaning do you give it?
Person's just got a silly smile.
Now, notice how all 4 of those are different. You know, if you just classify them as dog, this is what happens with when you get, as soon as you give something a name, you think you own it and you know what it is. But notice, all those are different. And there's more. So now we have 4 different dogs, all of which are totally different examples. Or 8 different. There's 9, 10.
There's one more.
11, and one more, 12, and this one. Oops. Do you get a different opinion looking at that one than that one? So then you might have some beliefs about dogs, which could be dogs are mean and ferocious. Or he looks like a dog ion. Dogs are full of fleas. Or dogs are intelligent. Hopefully you're getting the point here. It's all. So primary assumption, being awake is really being aware of what is. So you get less and less out of all this meaning giving, and you just, you know, this happened, and as soon as it left, it's out of your system, and you're aware of what else is going on. So you're aware of what's going on instead of being guided by your programming. You become aware of your personalities, your beliefs, your feelings, the submodalities which govern your judgments, and some key ideas about how you create your reality through giving meaning. Well, we already did this one. Nothing I see means anything versus I have given everything I see all the meaning it has for me. And then later on there's my thoughts do not mean anything. So you project your meaning onto the world. So this sentence from Byron Katie, when the mind believes what it thinks, it names what cannot be named, tries to make it real through the name, it believes that the names are real, that there's a whole world out there separate from itself, and that's illusion. The whole world is projected. And another way that we do that, it might be on my slides, but I don't remember what's on my slides. So we're going to give something a name. Reality. Now you all have some idea about reality. Like, how many of you think it's a thing? Maybe you're not sure after everything I've said. John Grinder and Richard Bandler basically said, if you can't put it in a wheelbarrow, it's not a thing. And you can't put reality in a wheelbarrow. Reality is one of the one of the interesting things is the original neural NLP idea that the map is not the territory came from linguistics. The people who are really good in linguistics came up with these ideas in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And one of the ideas in linguistics is, and it's part of NLP, is called nominalization. This is where you take a verb and something that's a process, and you turn it into a noun. So what is reality? Reality is something like a processing from your sensory system that occurs at every given moment. You're making a decision of what's real. And it's an ongoing process. But as soon as you turn that ongoing process into a nominalization, you get the word reality, and then you act like there's something that isn't there. Like, most of you have come to think this is real. It's a candlestick. Well, I thought a candlestick was one of those things made out of wax that you could light. But it's called a candlestick too. And it represents so it becomes a normalization because it represents what happens with price over a period of time. And the period of time is arbitrarily selected. This could be 5 seconds. It could be a day. And my two programmers have decided all of this is absolutely crazy and made up because they look at something called tick density and say even the way we begin to think about this isn't statistically valid, and no decent engineer would begin to think about representing stuff this way, but this is the way we represent it. And I'm just illustrating this as a point because now we're getting, you go, okay, I'm beginning to get what you're saying, but how does all this apply to trading? Well, we got about as fundamental as we could. Is like maybe this is a 1 minute candlestick, but it's still all made up. And then you don't like a 1 minute candlestick, so you can't make a decision for that. So you get a whole bunch of them. And then you do something to it, and you go, and this is some sort of moving average. And then you decide there's some meaning because these two suddenly went below the moving average. See how we play this game? Like, this is significant. So, what is a belief? So, as I said it before, any thought you attach to in any way, the more you attach to it, the more you become it. And everything, as I said in this workshop, reflects my beliefs. And each part of you has its own set of beliefs. The beliefs come from my modeling part. So how to think about beliefs. Well, first of all, a really good book that I recommend. It's called The 5 Levels of Attachment by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I'll go over them, so maybe you don't need to read the book, but I recommend it anyway. And the way I'm going to talk about it is watching a football game. And whether you're an American and think of football as American football, or you think of rugby as football, or soccer as football, it really doesn't matter. All of this could be the same thing. So you're going into a stadium and you're watching a football game, but you have an authentic self, your higher self sitting there, and it has no attachment to anything. So what happens? You watch the game, and you just notice the level of skill that goes on, and you have a real appreciation for everything that goes on. If some player from one side does a really good job, you applaud that and notice that. And if some other player on the other side then does a good job, you applaud that. And you just appreciate the whole thing. And if somebody falls down and doesn't do a good job, and then you may notice they do a good job later on. And you say, gee, he got over what was that, that bad mistake, and he's doing a good job. So you just appreciate the whole game. You don't care who wins, anything. Now, preference is the next level. You invest a little of yourself in that belief. So you go in and you decide, I want the team with the red jerseys to win. You don't know who they are or anything, but you want them to win just because you feel better if you have a preference. So you root for the red team. And, at the end of the game, you probably have, if they win, you might feel a little bit happier because they won. What you invested in and gave some preference to won. But if they don't, it's not that big a deal, and you go away and have a beer and don't think about it much. You go to the third level, it's called identification. And now it impacts who you are at an emotional level. So the red team is you. I am a red team fan. And it's very important that the red team wins now. And when they win, you get very happy, and when they lose, so when they score, you get very happy. When the other team scores, you get less happy, and you play this little game with yourself. Because now it becomes part of who you are. You've invested yourself in this. I am a fan of the red team. Now you've gone to the fourth level, you've internalized it. It's part of your self-worth. And when you get to this point and you internalize it, it kind of means you don't really like people who aren't red team fans. It's not, Sammy here likes the black team, and I can't understand why Sammy likes the black team. And Cyril likes the black team. Look, he's even wearing black. Something wrong with him. So I'd be at that level then. I would prefer all my friends to like the red team. And there's probably something wrong with those people who like the black team, and I just as soon avoid them. And now we go to fanaticism. Fanaticism is where you'd consider hurting somebody over your belief. So you may have heard examples like this, but there was actually a husband-wife combination, and one of them liked the Packers and one of them liked the Bears. And so they had a bet over the outcome of the game, and they said, well, whoever team wins, in other words, whoever wins, so it's like they won, not the team won, whoever wins gets to taser the other person. They had that bet. He won. Now, I'm going to assume he was a Packers fan, because the Packers absolutely win. So he won, and so he got to taser his wife. But whatever he did the first time, she didn't have much reaction to it, so he really went at it. And then they got a divorce over it, and she called the police on him. So nobody was killed, but this gets at the level of fanaticism. So fanaticism is your level of attachment to the belief, how much you own it and it owns you. So, when we do the Super Trader Lesson 1B, I have you go find out I am beliefs, which are at the level of identification. But those all of the beliefs you come up with would be at the level of identification, or they could be internalized, or they could be fanatical. They're not going to be preference or authentic self. So there's also a hierarchy of beliefs according to Robert Dilts. So some beliefs are about the environment. They're just has to do with what's out there. So an environmental belief might be markets tend to trend. If you don't care about markets, it has no impact on you. If you don't trade, it has no impact on you. And if I say this to anybody who doesn't trade or play the markets, you might go, oh, okay. And that's it, or not. Golf is a sport. It's another one. Then you might have behavior beliefs. These are beliefs about what you do, you behave. So now on the trading level it would be I trade is a verb, trans. I play golf. So we're not talking about your behavior. It affects you in a way because it's what you do. Then we go one more level, which has to do with capability. These beliefs typically have the words I can or cannot in them. In golf, you could say, I can break 80 regularly playing golf, or I can't do that. I can't even break 100. Trading, you could say, I can trade trends, or I can't trade trends. I don't know what it is. I just can't seem to trade trends. Value. Value beliefs are even more significant. It's what's important to you. It's important in golf. It's important to break 90, or it's not worth playing golf. For traders, it might be, it's important to follow the trend. And then identity, now it becomes a statement about who you are, and now we're at level 3 on the level of attachments. So I am a low handicap golfer. I am a trend follower. It uses the words I am followed by a noun or an adjective, not a verb. I am walking is a behavior belief. You're just walking. Describes what you're doing. Then finally, they're spiritual level beliefs. They're beliefs about you and your relationship with the universe. They're like meta beliefs. So the world is a dangerous place. In that early example is an example of a meta belief, or everything is perfect is an example of a spiritual meta level belief. All golfers will go to heaven because God loves them. Or God favors trend followers, and those who don't follow trends will go to hell. But those would be examples of spiritual level beliefs. So if you look at the hierarchy of structure of this, in terms of importance, it's a pyramid. with spiritual beliefs, identity beliefs, value beliefs. And if you look at the number of beliefs, it's an inverted pyramid. When you change these, you're going to have to affect things up on the top. If you decide everything is perfect versus everything is dangerous, that's going to change everything above here. So changing an identity or spiritual belief can change many, many things. So an exercise, come up with 10 to 20 identity level beliefs and run those through the belief examination paradigm. I think we're going to do that as an exercise. Let me see what the next slide is. So everybody come up with one identity level belief. It is I am, followed by some sort of noun or adjective. So what we're going to do is cover how to change beliefs with what I call a belief examination paradigm. So first you ask, where did the belief came from? Did your parents give it to you? Your friends give it to you? Was it picked up from the media? Or did you give it to yourself? I think a lot of people give themselves much more credit for their own beliefs than they deserve. So then you ask two sets of questions. One, what does the belief get me into? Another version of that would be, what happens when I have the belief? And here you list 5 to 10 things. And then you ask, and this could be the part of you that has the belief will have a good set of answers for what does it get you into? What happens when you have the belief? It developed the belief in the first place. And then the second question is, what does the belief get me out of? Or another version of that would be, who would I be without the belief? Now here, the part of you that came up with the belief in the first place should not answer this. Ask some other part. They'll know. And then based upon your two lists, you ask yourself a simple question, is this belief useful? Now, it's a matter of weighting, because every belief is useful in some context. You know, I am so afraid to enter the markets that I can never pull the trigger. That's a useful belief if you know nothing about trading. And you've had nothing but bad experiences in the past, and you haven't changed yourself, it's probably a very useful belief until you do. Even though you'll never make money if you have that belief. You probably won't lose as much. So if the belief is useful, obviously keep it. If it's not useful, you ask yourself the question, does this belief have charge? Where charge means it's emotionally laden. It has fear attached to it. It has shame, guilt, anger, something like that attached to it. If the answer to that is yes, you have to release the charge in order to release the belief. So If there's no charge, or once you've released the charge, then you can either find a much more useful belief or drop it altogether. So let's look at an example. The belief is, I am worthless. So I just gave an example of what it might get you into. So what does it get me into? Well, if I had that belief, I might feel empty and lack purpose. I'm sad most of the time. I push away things that would prove otherwise, that would prove that I have some value. My relationships might be terrible because I find people who reinforce the belief that I'm useless. You know, maybe if you have that belief, you probably married somebody who believes that too. Or at least after you got over your romantic attachment part, that's part of them came out. But you knew that would come out anyway, or you wouldn't have picked them. There's an interesting phenomena in attraction, which is people tend to be attracted to other people who push them away. In fact, if you look at attraction strategies, that's what works. If you want to attract someone into your life, push them away. Anyway, I got off track. What does that belief get me into? I can't make money in trading or investing because I might prove I have value. So already you might decide, if you couldn't from just the title of the belief, that's not useful. What does it get me out of? Well, it would get me out of being happy most of the time, having a purpose, attracting value into my life, having people in my life who value me, and making money trading and being a success. So obviously, this is a belief that you'd probably want to get rid of. I'm worthless. So where did it come from? You might say, if you have this belief, my mom died in childbirth, and my dad blamed me. When I was young, he'd tell me, I wish you'd never been born. You think if you were young and your dad said that and your mom had died in childbirth and your dad said it was your fault, you might feel worthless, and you think there might be some charge attached to that? So does it have charge? Yes. Guilt, because I feel responsible for my mom's death, and anger, because my dad keeps rejecting me. So could you get rid of that? No, you have to get rid of the guilt over your mom's death and the anger of your dad not rejecting you. So the last phase of the belief examination paradigm is to release the charge on the guilt and anger. Emotions come from judgments, and we as children are taught not to experience negative emotions. So males grow up with a John Wayne or a Brad Pitt or who knows what as a role model, and these are all tough guys. I think the last one I saw was The Rock playing Hercules, and somebody said something about very negative to him, and his reaction was, "Do you think I care?" So, like, really cool, because he didn't show some emotion. So these guys don't feel their feelings, they're tough, so that's the way you grow up. So when you have these negative feelings, you stuff them down, which means you really store them in your body, and they lock beliefs in place. And then it's kind of like you create a part of you who's not willing to feel a feeling. So you have a fear part or an anger part, and every time a situation comes up, it'll just can bring up a little bit of that feeling that's stored there and say, if you do this, this will happen. So an anger example, we'll go through a little feeling release in the next section, but an anger example might be you're trading breakouts. So you're a day trader, and the market starts out in this range, and you go, a significant breakout with that. If it breaks out of this range, either way, I'm going to take the trade. So it comes up here now and goes like that. So you get in, say this is yours, that much. You get in right here, and you're going to put your stop right here beyond that band. And then hopefully it won't penetrate back into this band, and it'll go up 2 or 3 times that. And then as soon as you get in, it turns around, it goes boom, 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 all the way down to here. So you got in, and it immediately went to the low of the day right after you got in. Now, would it be easy to reflect on that and say, they got me, or something else? And if you had an anger part, well, it might be easy for the anger part to get really mad. So now you're mad. And then it goes like this. And if you were mad here, now you're really mad. And then it goes like this. And at this point, you're furious, but you're clear enough to suddenly realize that you missed another entry point right here. And then it goes all the way up to here. And that's where it closes. And you're really upset. And you go home and you go in the house, and the dog senses your anger and growls at you, and you kick the dog, and the dog bites you back. And then maybe you have the same sort of interchange with your spouse. And you wake up maybe slightly relieved of some of that anger, but you carry it with you most of the day, ready to do the same thing the next day. Whereas if you just did feeling release for the anger, it's not going to come up. And yeah, this happens, but you saw the second signal, so you lost 1 R here and you made 3 R there, and you made your plus 2 R, and it's you have that acceptance of the fact that you get stopped out from time to time, maybe more than half the time. So an example of the belief examination paradigm, I've already asked you to do this, to think of one belief. And so those of you who might be watching it at home, do that, and then replay it and run it through the belief examination paradigm. So that's the end of section 1, so let's take a break.